Hello, everyone. Hope everyone is fine. Today we are starting now our second webinar organized by the study group on research and innovation of the University of Campinas, and also involved in the Glocal seminar event. It's a great pleasure. Our main theme today is about measuring the impacts of academia and beyond academia, beyond the scientific domain. So it's a very important and present subject that many people are focused on, trying to measure these impacts, social impacts, economic impacts, environmental, societal engagement, etc. These are more or less the set of things that we hope to discuss today. And for this, we have three invitees here that are going to take the word. I would like to introduce to you, first of all, Professor Maria Nedeva, who is professor at the University of Manchester, Professor of Science and Innovation Policy at the University of Manchester, and also Professor Jacques Marcovitch, who is professor at the University of São Paulo, former rector of the University of São Paulo, and presently he coordinates a project called the Metrics Project, which is precisely focused on this main subject we have here today, trying to develop and apply methodologies and metrics and indicators of impacts of the academy. And also Professor Justin Axelberg, who is a senior researcher that is presently working precisely in this metrics project at the University of São Paulo. Thank you all for accepting, taking part in this webinar. I would like to start. I will invite Professor Nedeva to make her presentation. The idea is to have 20 minutes, more or less, presentation of each one. And then we open the word to the floor, okay, to the discussions. The good thing here is to discuss ideas. So thank you, everyone, for coming. Professor Nedeva,
okay,
the floor
thank
is
you
yours.
very much, Sergio. I would like to keep this fairly informal. That's why I'm not going for this professor this and professor that thing. You're very welcome to call me Maria, right? I know we Marias have a problem. We're never the Maria. Right, but still, you know, I can't be like Madonna, but I can be Maria in this conversation. Now, while I'm messing about with the technicalities, namely sharing my presentation, let me thank the organizers for inviting me to that, because I think that nobody here, wow, oh yeah. Yes, right. I'm clicking something randomly. Anyway, nobody who has joined this seminar on webinar on Zoom or YouTube doubts that actually this is a very, very important topic. Impact and scientific organizations. Sergio called it academia, but I would rather talk about universities and the different functions they fulfill within a science system, and of course, national research spaces as well. Now, I would like to start by reminding us what are we going to do today, what I would like to do today. And we've shared ideas before the webinar, and we know that actually the follow-on presentations flow quite nicely, and we have a bit of role for debate. Now, I also have to say that I have a reputation to live to, and I usually provoke people to think. I'm very successful not because I profess truths, but because I make people question what they believe. at this very moment. So what I'll do is I'll remind people what is impact. I would talk briefly about measuring impact, evaluation and impact. And after that, we will move to the problems commonly associated with evaluating through impact, namely using the impact to evaluate organizations, policy schemes, etc. And at the end, I would like to mention a possible way forward, because thinking about the impact of organizations and policies is not likely actually to go away anytime soon. So all we can do is to make it better, not try to completely demolish what people try to do. Now, what is impact? At the most basic and fundamental level, impact is a difference of a phenomenon or object, social object A, that can be fully attributed to B, which tells us several things. The first thing is that actually a lot of the issues around impact are about measuring difference, the difference that has been enacted in A. But it also tells us that to talk about the impact of B on A, we have to be able to, in some sense, causally attribute these changes to certain actions of B. Now, the other thing that's very interesting is whenever we talk about impact, we talk about intentionality, right? Any kind of difference we may enact in a phenomenon, social phenomenon or object, but there was no intentionality behind it, is effect. Okay, and here we have a bit of a muddle between impact and effect. So traditional sociology, for example, has always talked about effects. And that is where we kind of, when we tried first to tackle impact and study it and measure it, had a bit of a problem. What part of this is impact? What is effect? Now, to get away from this muddle a bit, I will show you something. Now, this is a classic business school 2x2, isn't it? So when I came up with it about some time ago in the context of a project called Euresia, where I led a team in Europe to study the impact or effects of setting up the European Research Council on the scientific system in Europe. So I was very proud of that, because we used 2 dimensions, namely whether the change is expected or unexpected, and intended or unintended, right? And you can see that all these things in the 4 boxes actually are impact, because there was intentionality behind them. But intentionality, this intentionality tells us that when we aim to achieve, to affect certain change, some of it we intend. So for example, whenever I stand up in front of my students, my intention is to enable them to learn something, right? However, that is a long shot, because I may intend them to learn something, but the home run will be I motivate them to learn, because I know that knowledge is not a consumable good, right? But then you see, there is collateral. Some of them may fall asleep, because while I'm trying to motivate them to learn, they actually are bored stiff. And of course, there are accidental effects, like they catch up on their favorite shows because they can, while I'm lecturing, because they have their iPads and they can put their earpods in and watch Game of Thrones instead of listening to me boring them to death. That's an accidental effect, right? So I know I love giving extreme examples, because if you don't remember ever what I told you, the learned things that I told you about impact, you will remember my kind of extreme examples, right? So, but you see what I mean. Now, the interesting thing, please remember these types of impact, the home runs, which are expected and intended, the long shots that are intended but not really expected, you know, they may happen, they may not, unintended and expected, collateral, and unintended and unexpected, accidental. So it's very important, because we'll get back to that later. Now, so let me now briefly expand on some kind of not contradictions, but some dualities when we measure and attribute impact. So looking at a very large data set of literature, my team actually concluded that there are two framework ways in which we measure impact. And one of them is opinion-based, and that is the widest one that studies of impact show. So we go somewhere and go and having this funding from this particular policy scheme change some sort of scale. That is opinion-based, right? And it is very interesting, because usually when we do that, we find what we're looking for. It's a bit like the light and the keys under the light. We don't look beyond the light. And usually these studies are actually user funded, right? And yes, we do find the effect. So did this funding help you? Yes, I did receive a letter several years back asking, do you think attending Manchester University helped you get your PhD? Hell yes, of course it did. I did the doctoral program at Manchester University, of course it did. So are these people registering impact or effect? Well, probably not. Right. So the other way is causal attribution, and we all know that there is a problem with causal attribution in social sciences. At best, we can actually talk about soft causality, where describing the mechanisms through which change occurs or may occur is actually attributing it. Now, another duality is that studies use either single or multiple measurements. So a lot of studies go, yes, I will go and I'll ask people whether something had impact and I will claim impact. Now, usually the ones that aim at causal attribution actually do multiple measurements. So you take a measurement at time A and you take a measurement at time B and you register change of some description. Now the issue though is that with multiple measurement studies, there is a problem of attribution, because I'll get back to that, why there is a problem with attribution here. And then of course we have studies that see impact as a self-referential things or comparative change, right? So in fact, if we go only in Manchester University and say, does the ref kind of incentivize you to think about the impact of your research before you start conducting the research? That's opinion-based, single measurement, self-referential. If, however, we're interested in how different types of organizations of universities experience this impact or effect, we're going to go not only to Manchester University, which is a wannabe kind of university, but we will go also to Oxford University. And then very likely we will find something that is worth talking about, but not here, probably some other time. Okay, evaluation and impact. One of the shifts in evaluating the performance of organizations, schemes, and institutions over the last 15 to 20 years has been that the whole thing shifted towards evaluating impact, right? So there's a lot of studies who evaluate or claim to be evaluating the impact of universities, of research projects, of research schemes, of research funding organizations and agencies, etc. Now, that is kind of okay, probably not brilliantly done all the time, but as I said, we can't fight with that. Science is expensive, a lot of public funding goes in it, we have to be accountable for that. And it's not about output, it's not about publishing stuff that nobody reads, it's about the change that we actually enact in our reality, society, economy, etc. However, the problem with that is that these evaluations have very serious consequences for the organizations of research, right? So we probably should aim to get it right, okay? But at the same time, there are problems with getting this right. And there are three sets of problems, the way I see it. The first set of problems or issues is about measuring impact. The second one is about attributing impact. And the third one is about responsibility for impact. So measuring impact. Now, we have problems measuring impact because impact takes very long time to unfold. Okay, so that inevitably draws the analyst's focus to the home runs, namely the impact that is intended and expected. But that is the simplest level of impact ever. And a lot of this impact is not actually the impact organizations or policies aim to achieve, right? Now, the problem, I told you I'll get back to that. The problem here, though, is that if we focus on the long shots, we have this thing where the ability to register and attribute impact is like a seesaw, right? So if we try to measure impact without giving it sufficient time to unfold, we're not likely to find many changes, but we will have very high level of attribution. And if we leave it enough time to unfold, we will register probably a lot of change, but very low kind of ability to attribute. So the longer time we afford between an action and the effects that it precipitated or the impact, the more problematic it is to attribute it. Now, locale and priorities, and this is very interesting, and it started fascinating me even more during the pandemic, by the way. And the reason is that when I looked at the 3 labs that in the UK that developed the so-called Oxford vaccine or AstraZeneca vaccine for COVID, it's very interesting because these labs actually were very peripheral before the pandemic. And they were peripheral in all kinds of senses, including that very small proportion of their funding was actually UK public funding. They were mainly funded from the Wellcome Trust, the Howard Hughes Medical Institutes, the Devil's Fund for Fight with whatever, it's very funny called, but they have a fund that funds this kind of things. Do you know why? Because actually one of these labs was working on Ebola, not our problem. Another one was working on malaria, not our problem. And the third one was working on coronaviruses, but they were very rare type of coronaviruses that never jumped between humans, and they only affected camel herders in Mongolia and sugarcane cutters somewhere, not our problem. So you can see how actually, if you evaluate these labs according to their impact prior to the COVID pandemic, the evaluation of their impact will be very different from the evaluation after the pandemic. Measuring change is also problematic because there's always dominance of opinion-based self-referential accounts. Okay, and this has very kind of limited, I know that narrative drives the world, but again, a lot hangs on these narratives, right? So how do we get them right? And of course, there's very broad field. So when we start looking for changes, the question is, what do we look at? The field is very broad. So we tend actually to always ignore the collateral and accidental effects. And I think that is very problematic in terms of assessing the effects. And of course, attributing impact causally is methodologically and practically problematic because of noise, distance, and mediation. So basically, the policy space is very noisy. The research space is very noisy. You get many kind of factors or causes feeding into the same effect. How do you disentangle them? So it is kind of a big thing. And of course, the responsibility for impact. And this is a bit of a biggie for me because technically we can probably deal with measuring impact, attributing it, but actually, when we look at it, the organizations that are being evaluated according to the impact they enact are very rarely primarily responsible for this impact. So this brings us to the question, how fair it is to judge their performance by the impact that happens when they actually have no authority over these effects. Right. So the question, given the issues with measuring and attributing impact and that responsibility for this impact is limited, is it fair to evaluate organizational performance based on their impact? That is a question. I'm not going to answer it. I'm just throwing it out there. And in a way of provocation, maybe it is time to shift our evaluative focus from impact that has happened to assessing the conditions that these organizations have created for certain impact to occur, right? Because they have full responsibility over these conditions. And now I want to thank you for listening patiently to me. I didn't overrun this time, which is a big thing for me. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask me. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very interesting speech, Maria. Very, very interesting and motivating. Those who please have questions, please put in the YouTube chat so we can transfer after the other talks we have today. We are going to open the word to the floor. So these questions that you are now sending will be presented to our presenters. So thank you again, Professor Maria Nedeva. And now I would like to invite Professor Jacques Marcovitch to take the award. Please, Professor Marcovitch.
Sergio, first of all, I would like first of all to thank you so much for this opportunity to bring us together. I think it's quite an important and very relevant theme that is on the day-to-day priority of our communities in Brazil. And I want to thank very much Maria for this eye-opener presentation. I think that the concept that Maria is bringing is what should be a concern of all of us when we deal and we apply impact evaluation in our organization. What we will do is less discuss the concept, but say how it is being practiced in Brazil. And I'm looking forward to Maria's comments after our presentation. What we will do, and this is in the index, next, Justin, please. We will begin with a question that was formulated to us, talking about the evolution of research indicators. The reason why we answered this question is because we had a Congress of the Latin American Association of Technology Management, and they told us during the 40 years of existence of our tech, what happened in terms of science indicators. So we would present to you this evolution, this history of mentality regarding indicators. Then we will mention how measurement of performance in Brazilian higher education institution, but the two categories of impact, the way that are being practiced. I would say that it's a complement, it's another discussion which doesn't address what Maria just introduced us, but it's a way that we have an impact regarding knowledge and impact regarding the use of the information or the use of the knowledge that's being generated. Then we will present 3 approaches in Brazil to map local impact. And this is the case of Imbrapa, USP, and Unicamp. Those are answers mainly to the society. So we explain in a moment where budgets are being discussed and the future of university is being discussed, what can we provide to society in terms of information, in terms of content, to explain what is being done in those public institutions that has to do with research and teaching. Changing the culture through measurement, I think that we are in a process of changing the culture. When we discuss impact, it's a change of culture. And why? Because essentially our institutions in Brazil and maybe in Latin America are more driven to present results than impact. We know how to say how many students we graduated, how many research were published, how many papers were published, how many articles were cited, but hardly we put ourselves in the place of society and say what society is expecting from us. So the 3 approaches in some way address this issue, and then we will have 2 comments that Justin will do on moving towards more responsible evaluation and strengthening opening science. Next. So the first question is, what happened regarding research indicators? And when we looked at what happened since the 60s to recent time, we will see that the first evolution has to do with the so-called national innovation systems. The concern, and at UNESCO, I remember all the effort that UNESCO did to establish a national science base, and the measures were the inputs to universities. But then when we came to the 80s, there was an evolution saying that the institutions should be a supplier and users of knowledge. And so the idea was not anymore to establish a national science base, but to establish research capacity. And finally, the measure were the output of university that I already cited. More recently, now we are seeing science and technology and innovation as a complex ecosystem. The intention is to respond to the concern of society, and we saw it during the COVID period. What society expected from university and research institutes were answers, were response, how to help society to face that crisis. And the measures are the impact of university regarding activity and its relation to society. Next. So the way that we are discussing this in the metrics project is there are 2 types of impact, 2 distinct uses of impact. The first use of impact is the change that university activity has on scientific understanding, which we could call academic impact. And the most common proxy for this impact is through citations. Now, when we move to what we could call societal-centered indicators the change that university activity has on the world outside academia in social, environmental, technological, and political spheres. And the most common proxies for this type of impact is evidence from stakeholders. With all the care that we should have on Maria's observation on how the challenge to measure impact. But those are two types of impact. The one that universities say, this is what we produce, and this is what was cited. And then the perspective of the stakeholder and society saying, well, this is how we see the usefulness of what the university or the research institute is doing. Next. So now we will introduce very quickly the three approaches in public communication of impact that have different focuses, different methods of presentation, and different audiences. Next. The first one has to do with the Imbrapa social balance, and Sergio is very familiar with this approach, which looks to the social goods produced by that publicly owned agricultural research institute, which is Imbrapa, in terms of technology transfer, job creation, direct and indirect return on investment, and the number of people that have been reached in terms of social projects. Next. What we have here is the annual report of Imbrapa. This is a synthesis. They measure the number of job creation. They measure how much was the return on the investment. They have a methodology where they say that each monetary unit, each real that society invests in Imbrapa, no, not yet, is the return is 17 times what is being invested. And then you have social benefit and also the recognition. They consider these parameters as example. Obviously, their report is much more sophisticated, and you have the methodology that they use to identify technology transfer. This is a national research institute in agriculture, so they have this interaction with the agriculture sector. And as we know, Brazil today is a producer of foodstuff, is an exporter of foodstuff, and so Imbrapa considers itself as a contributor to this agricultural development. Next. Then we have the Unicamp study, and we have a team at Unicamp that measured the direct and indirect impact of the university activity on the city of Campinas. See that what they did was to look at the city. We are talking about a city of almost 2 million people. So this is Brazilian, Latin American scale of cities. And they found that so much money, we should divide this by 5, 3 billion reais, $3 billion were generated by the university, signifying 21% of the city's entire GDP, demonstrating that the key role that the university has on the well-being and prosperity of major urban centers. Clearly, we can discuss the methodology, but this is a process to especially for state institutions that will ask, why should we invest at Unicamp? And what this team did was to bring an answer on some metrics that can help to answer this question. Next. And here you have the Unicamp data, number of startup companies that were created through students and professors of Unicamp, how job creation was created. And this is today in Brazil, the issue of job creation, as we all know, it's a strategic issue for I would say, even the survival of society as a democracy. If we don't create enough jobs, we have a duality that is growing, and we might find ourselves threatening our own democracy. So job creation is a key issue that we have to consider as a priority. Next. Then we have the São Paulo study. And here, what our colleagues, Azzoni, Vassalo, and Haddad did was to look at the increase in income by the graduated of the 3 public universities. And what they did was the following. When they compared how those students got into the university, how they graduated, and the differential in terms of increase of income, this income that was increased pay taxes. And so part of these taxes is a way to say how much we increase the income of our graduates and how much they pay taxes, which in some way is a return of what society invested in those public universities. Is some way to say, well, in some way, those public universities are returning through taxes what was invested in the three public universities. Next. Now, all this, and I will transfer in a minute to Justin for him to continue, my colleague who is the head research, the senior researcher in our team. The reason why we present this slide is to underline the word unpredictability. I mean, we are migrating to a new era. We compare this 20 years, this third decade of the 21st century, more or less as what happened the last century during the 31st years. We are migrating to a new era. The health crisis is augmenting the human development, decreasing the human development index. We have economic crisis with increasing unemployment, increasing inequality, increasing polarization, increasing extreme events. The geopolitical crisis now, even with Ukraine, the war in Ukraine, increased the unpredictability. So when we discuss impact, we have to be very conscious and very humble to say that the future is not a continuation of the past. We are living a period of extreme unpredictability. And I will transfer now to Justin for him to continue. Thank you. Justin?
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Right, so I'll just start off. So in response to these kinds of extreme unpredictability, so we have several different kinds of factors that are also driving things forward, which is the drive towards environmental sustainability, the way the universities have adopted sustainable development goals, so digital transition and the ability to communicate over much greater distances and the ability to have impact both on a global and local scale simultaneously. And also this kind of increased global awareness that Brazilian universities have about their competitors, but also their kind of their collaborators as well. So we're going to talk first of all, so I'm going to pick up a small comment that Maria made, in fact, about this kind of problem that we have with the idea that there's full attribution and kind of a deterministic relationship between what universities produce and the effects that these universities have on society. And obviously there are all kinds of factors like noise, like distance, mediation, and everything else. Part of the problem with this is that I think sometimes we treat as if there is a fact of the matter and an impact that is possible to isolate as being the universities alone. This means that there is a kind of change in attitude needed among all levels of higher education in terms of understanding that it's not this deterministic and hard property. This means that this probably isn't going to be the impact of one single perfectly written policy, but a culture change that's going to take a long time and a lot of different kinds of approach. So we need to rethink this kind of how we actually approach evaluation. It's not a matter of having better numbers. It's not a matter of having one single policy. So in order to do this, obviously, as well, we need to think much more in terms of the stakeholders that are engaged in this. And so this means at all levels. This goes from early career researchers up to people who are currently professors, up to research leaders. We need to look at funding agencies. And also we need to look at the opinion of our external stakeholders in our decision-making processes and how evaluation is constructed. And so the first stage of this will be to identify the significant kinds of restricting factors, things like corporativism, things like certain conservatism among different kinds of stakeholder, and to identify propelling factors that will lead to the kind of change that we want. So this will be things like new demands, new kinds of technologies available to us in order to generate and construct better evaluation in the future. So first, we need to move towards more responsible evaluation. At the moment, quite often, I think this debate is quite polarized between people who think we should be looking at entirely qualitative, sort of opinion-based sorts of mechanisms that Maria mentioned, or people that still think that we should be going entirely quantitatively based and we should be looking at only indicators, and that this has sort of less merit perhaps, that opinion-based measures have less merit. So we can see that in the Dutch debates over the last couple of years, over the last year or so, that in fact the debate has become quite polarized, when in fact we need to be looking more towards having proper contextualization of indicators, what indicators actually mean, how far they can actually make their claims, and these need to be contextualized properly within narrative structures. So I think in that sense, the DOR, the San Francisco Declaration, now has Unicamp and USP as signatories, and this is an important move, an important statement of intent to move forward into the future. And this is something that we should be looking to create better implementation mechanisms within our own departments and within our universities in the coming years. So the other thing that I think will be really important increasingly over the next couple of years is the strengthening of open science. So Latin America has a tradition, a very strong tradition, that in fact started from a place of much more advanced than Europe or North America. And this is quite often, I think, largely thanks to Cielo and a vision from FAPESP within sort of 20 years ago in constructing a fully open, access library that was available to all and had no APCs or low APCs. And this put us in a real kind of position of advantage over everybody else. And this is something that needs to be pressed. And this is somewhere that I think Latin America should have real leadership. However, we also need to be developing new measures of usage and uptake of open knowledge. It's not enough just to be opening on our own. We need to demonstrate exactly what the value of that is. And so that's looking at better indicators to show how public policy in clinical settings and education, third sector and industry are actually using the open knowledge that we produce. So I think that's going to be a real priority in the next couple of years. And finally, I'm just going to comment briefly on this UNESCO Open Science report, which came out last year. And the fact that quite often we look at open access as being the kind of the main element of open science, when in fact it's much, much broader than that. So open access is the guarantee that knowledge and results are published in a way that is more accessible to other scientists and to the public. However, some of the huge contribution that especially universities in the global south and in places that are slightly more distant from research centers is the production of open data. And so that's the idea that we generate and we can share the results of field work, and we can allow science and the public to access, recreate experiments and to understand the dynamics of science. So one of the great contributions, for example, is the fact that I think in Brazil, over 70% of the open data sets on Amazon sustainability and forest monitoring are produced by universities within the Amazon biome. So these are places like Federal do Amazonas, Federal do Pará. These are universities that are emerging research centers, but make a great contribution because they are there on the ground and they are able to collect and use local knowledge and local resources in order to produce these data sets, which can then be adopted by other countries and other universities and research centers. So this is a very important dynamic that we have to connect kind of local problems to global research communities. And finally is the priority for Open to Society, which is a commitment to actively engage all stakeholders in planning, production, and evaluation of knowledge. So this is the kinds of mechanisms I was talking about before. Thank you. I will hand back over to Jacques.
If you want to take the PowerPoint off, Justin. Yeah. Well, it's time to give the floor back to Sergio and to appreciate Maria's comments whenever she will be ready to share with us her views. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Marcovitch. Thank you, Justin, for this excellent and motivating talk. So we have some questions arriving from YouTube, the chat. And before going to them, people are here collecting the questions. I will take advantage of this position I am in order to start the discussion. So Let me formulate two or three questions for you. This is a very controversial subject, no? The way we evaluate impacts from the academic activity from universities. And some examples, for instance, the examples that Professor Nedeva gave us about the COVID vaccine in Oxford from 3 labs that they weren't important until that moment. No, it's a very interesting example showing the unpredictability, but showing also the way, the timing of the impacts. The timing is very important, you know, in academia. When you are producing knowledge, the timing of this impact, when this knowledge is going to be used, is going to impact society, is something that nobody knows. And so then I make my questions from this perspective. No? I mean, we at the universities, we needed to be prepared to evaluate our impacts, and that means we need to be organized to this and to have a governance, an internal, a corporate governance to evaluate, not only to evaluate the final impacts, but also to monitor. I mean, this is the only way I see that is possible to bypass the problems of uncertainty we have. No, we need to monitor it constantly in order to and be able to get the main outputs and outcomes, more the outcomes and impacts that the university is preparing and delivering all the time, no, for society. This is not that easy to do. I mean, organizationally speaking. And this is one question. You know, are we prepared to do this, and how to be prepared to deliver this? You know, what we do as a social institution able to produce positive impacts over the society. And this is the first question. And a second question refers to the idea. Now, Justin showed us this idea of open society, you know, how to engage society, because I believe, and I think you all here believe, that engagement is absolutely critical in monitoring and evaluating societal impact from universities. And if you could talk a little bit more about this, the problem of engagement, which is not easy in a still very closed institution as our universities are. And so these two questions, just we start the discussion, and then we go for we open the door for to the floor. Thank you. It's for you all. You know, I don't know if you who wants to.
Maria would like to go first.
Yes, because I will go for provocation again. So, Sergio, if we assume that we continue to measure impact as the change that has occurred and we attribute, you're probably correct. But you see, with this kind of approach, continuously monitoring impact, looking back, we will notice that very soon the attention of the producers becomes measuring the impact rather than generating it, which actually we already see in the UK, right? So in social sciences, a lot of people we talk to say, I'm not even going to write a proposal that I don't believe will produce 3 papers in research policy. But you see, this means change of topic selection. So these people are researching stuff that will have academic impact, but actually it's not. It is a big kind of useless, I was going to call it another type of game, but I'm not going to use funny names, even if they come from the Bible about things. You probably all guessed what I was going to say, but basically it kind of is pretty pointless game because we skew how we select topics. Certain sub-communities get isolated from the global communities because in the UK we start selecting topics that don't fit with our field because it's fragmented adhocracy, right? And then the fields that are not, like particle physics, they don't care about the local conditions and monitoring their impact and that kind of thing. They go, okay, I'm here discovering the laws of the universe. I know that 85% of the universe doesn't recognize the laws of traditional physics. So I'm going beyond the standard model. And that is the purpose of my life. And I don't care what my head of department says or what they want to put in the ref. I don't care. And that's the responses we get from them. So the whole thing about scientific or practical impact is very field specific, but also it can actually lead to playing games and dispersing effort, which we don't have to. How about though, we say, okay, let me ask you, have you ever met an academic or a scholar or scientist who has said, I don't ever to have any influence or impact? I doubt it, because we're all totally vain. If we were not there for the recognition that we change something, we will be doing something else, like getting rich, for example, right? So how about we start evaluating the organizations and what we do according to the conditions we create for this impact to occur. So you mentioned engagement. That is one absolutely key thing. So for social scientists, for example, we can do so much about engagement. And I know you have this problem in Brazil, but in the UK, we have it as well. We have areas where in the schools, children haven't ever met anybody who's gone to university, right? And they are poor areas that have been poor for generations. We're talking couple of 100 years or something, right? So how about we engage, we start pulling these people too, because we shouldn't forget the biggest impact and effects of universities are the ones that are hard to measure, namely being a civilizing factor, right? You mentioned it, Jacques, being a civilizing factor, but also when we measure, even if we measure the effect on the local economy, Manchester University, for example, have much bigger income through the fact that it brings in so many students and they spend here. So they maintain banks, local banks, the rental market, they maintain the entertainment industry, this kind of thing, right? And that is a great part of the local economy. So it's not only about startups. Yes, we have this as well. So I actually think that monitoring constantly the impact is not the way to go to finalize. I think monitoring consistently the conditions we create for certain impact to occur is the way to go. But then we, as students of science and innovation, have to do much better our work in unpacking these conditions, because we still don't understand them properly. And we certainly don't understand the kind of different levels of effects that occur, right? Or how to enable them. Sorry, probably, yeah. That's, yeah. Thank you.
What Maria just said is a sphere of concern which we have definitely to take not only in consideration, but it should orient what we discuss about impact. Having said that, we have concrete issues. A rectorship office has to defend yearly the budget of the university. And each year, he has to go to the government the legislative and executive, and say, we have to receive such amount of money, even if we know that society have urgent needs in health, education, so and so. And what the decision makers will ask is the following: well, we know that you need all this money, but we have other problems. So the rectorship office will need arguments to explain. And to have those arguments, the culture of impact evaluation has to be not only at the rectorship office or at the central administration, but the teams that are working on the frontier issue and other projects, including their engagement with the stakeholders, should provide this for the one that have to assure this university budget for each year. So I think that what Maria is telling us, take care, because depending on what you are saying about impact, somebody can come and say, well, maybe this is not exactly the right dimension. And maybe you should take into consideration the idea of what the university is creating as favorable conditions, or a condition that can help other changes to happen and other impact to happen. But still, we will need each year elements as the one that the three approaches that we presented will help those representative of the university to go to society and say what we are doing. I will conclude with the question that also Sergio mentioned. We have to create dialogue spaces. I mean, small consultative councils and other, where the university can dialogue with society. We can't rely only on the parliament and the government. We need, and we did it, I think, during the sanitary crisis, during COVID, because then society came to the university and the university went to society to say, well, what can we do together? And this was done, but we can't do it only when there is a crisis. We have to create dialogue mechanisms continuously and have those stakeholders helping us in conceiving some new project and to build new horizons. So I conclude saying, Maria is helping us to say, be very concerned when you use the word impact. There are issues that has to do with methodology, with concept. And from our side, we are saying, our university are quite young, comparing with the UK university, with the British university. We don't have any university with more than 80 years old. And so we are learning on how to develop this culture regarding evaluation and impact, taking into account this interface that we have with government and with society. Thank you.
I have to, sorry, Sergio, may I just a sentence?
Please.
Have to clarify that, as we all do, I actually, my comment was based on our environment in the UK. And I think what you said, Jacques, is very, very pertinent, because how you approach it depends on how the organizations are financed. Because you see, with us, yes, there is kind of assessment of impact, but we don't argue university by university every year or anything like that. We're paid per student, and then we have kind of some research funding baseline, which is subject to this kind of evaluation and stuff like that. But this, of course, will matter immensely, right? So you're correct. But I loved your examples, by the way, of how it is done. But actually, the thing is that when we talk about impact on cities, Sergio, like Unicamp, we probably need to think about the general economy of the city as well, and how students improve it, right? Not only about startups. Just an idea. Anyway, thank you.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Thank you, thank you. We have some questions from the audience.
They're in Portuguese.
Some are in Portuguese, but I can translate them. The first one is from Professor Ana Maria Carneiro. She asks about, it's headed to Jacques and Justin, about the responsible evaluation, how this emerged and what are the main characteristics of research evaluation. This is one question. I will make all the questions maybe. And then we have a question from Pierre Oyon, who is from the Fundação Oswaldo Cruz here in Rio de Janeiro. He says, dear Jacques, in your paper, The University in 2022, you suggested an unity of intelligence that, can you please detail it for us? And then I will make these two questions and then there are 2 or 3 more. Who wants to start?
Yeah, I will begin and then I will ask Justin. I will talk about the past and Justin will talk about the present and the future due to our generations. When we look at the universities, and I will take the case of the University of Sao Paulo, probably Sergio remember when Goldenberg published a lista dos improdutivos. And what he did was to look at the list of faculty of our university, how much paper were published, how many articles, and I mean, in some way, the media got that list. So the concern at that time was that concept called productivity. I mean, a very poor concept. Productivity is the number of articles and papers that a professor published. I mean, then we went to a new phase where there was a concern because of the state, and Maria is quite right in mentioning how different it is depending on how an university is financed. Our university is not financed by the number of students or the number of research. It's a quota that was decided many years ago, and the state gives a chunk of money that we have to distribute among the 3 universities. So some years after came the issue of efficiency. How much money does your institute or your department is receiving, and what are you doing with this money? But then when we come more recently, and this discussion on providing to society information about what we are doing, came the concept of effectiveness. And effectiveness has to do with saying, well, it's not a question only for you to be productive and efficient, but we have to be effective. You have to help in some way. And please remember what Maria said. We have to be very concerned with this type of effectiveness, because sometimes good research is not done because the researcher is concerned with providing an impact than providing a good knowledge. Recently, during COVID, came another parameter, which is responsiveness. Responsiveness means the ability of a university or a research institute to respond to an external demand. And then we discussed this during these presentations through Maria and Sergio, saying that responsiveness should be an indicator of performance, of academic performance. Who is able to respond to an external demand or an internal demand in the university? I will conclude. I just will mention to Pierre Oyon, my dear friend, that the idea of what we call an intelligence unit is nothing more than an office that is, I would call, the manager of metrics. Public universities in Brazil publish a lot of reports, and those reports are written based on what we called in the past the annual statistic repository. These were not interoperable data, they were not granular, and this is something that Justin may comment. But now what we are trying to do is to establish near the rectorship office 2 or 3 people that will make sense with the indicator. I mean, they will try to be the base, the database of the university. So when we have to report to an institution or to publish a report or to provide data on the university, there will be more consistency because this unit will have those data. Why we call this intelligence? Because the idea is for the university to have a place where not only the available data is there, but new data through surveys can eventually be gathered and help the university to understand where it has been, where it is, and where the university would like to go. Justin, maybe you want to complement, and then we'll give back the floor to Sergio.
Perfect, no problem. Well, I'll start off with the question on responsible evaluation, which kind of emerged in response to this idea when Jacques was talking about effectiveness, a kind of new managerialism that took hold in higher education throughout the 90s and 2000s that basically sought to produce simplistic quantitative measures as a way of evaluating the quality of a scientist, even if you know nothing about the field of research or the science involved. So it was an idea that essentially managers could take the place of evaluators. They could essentially make snap judgments based on things like the H-index and things like the journal impact factor of where the article was published, which obviously, as we know, first of all, the journal impact factor. And so in Brazil as well, sorry, Maria, just to explain, most of our evaluation of postgraduate courses is based on the quality of the journal in which it's published, which gives you a set number of points depending on where it's published. This at the time was relatively revolutionary, but I think was introduced sometime in the late 80s, is now kind of quite outmoded, because obviously, as we know, the quality of the scientific quality of an article has very little bearing on which journal it's published in, and also the number of citations that the article itself accrues has very little to do with the journal impact factor. So kind of the really big moment in responsible evaluation was the appearance of the San Francisco Declaration, which said that journal impact factor cannot be used as a judge of scientific quality, but furthermore, these kinds of judgment have all sorts of unintended consequences. For example, using strong bibliometric indicators with no contextualization tended to favor certain kinds of groups over others. It tended to favor more senior researchers over more junior researchers, tended to favor men over women broadly because of like a number of different factors and dynamics. So the move towards responsible evaluation is essentially to start establishing some kind of equity within the research system in which people move away from simplistic indicators and start looking into the context as to why performance kind of emerges. So this is about producing new kinds of mechanisms that can judge more fairly the quality of a scientist or not, rather than just relying on a couple of indicators and using things like Goldenberg's list of improductivos, which, while that was absolutely of its time, is not the way that we think about the dynamics of science anymore, and is kind of viewed as an unfair way of judging the quality of scientists or the performance of scientific institutions.
Thank you all. Let me transmit two more questions that are related from Evandro Cogo and Erika Siqueira. It's about how to better use the sustainable development goals. Are them a way to promote societal impacts? Are they a way to promote the social engagement that we are talking about?
Maybe I can make a comment. Yesterday, it was launched, the report, a 500-page report on Jeffrey Sachs was there, and many other authors of that report were there. And when it was asked to them, how about the implementation? The answer was, we have first to stop the war in Ukraine. Well, this is not very easy. Second, we have to invest more in those objectives. And we have to make sure that we should be concerned with the excluded in society. Three objectives which are very, very difficult to attain. Having said that, which is a kind of saying, well, those targets, because we have the 17 objectives and we have 169 targets, those targets will not be achieved in any way. Having said that, those 17 objectives, in some way, it's a way to structure priorities. And the fact that you have the issue of environment, labor, the gender issues, it helps to put some structure on the discussion of development. So to conclude, I think that the Sustainable Development Objective can be used, yes, to discuss the future of the university. We can take them to check what should be the priority. I don't think any university should take into account or consider the 17 objectives at the same time. We should at the same time leave completely free to the researcher, to the faculty, what they want to research, but at the same time say, well, the university would like to contribute more on inclusion, on environment, on the energy transition, on the digital transition. Those are priorities that the society and the university consider that they are priority. And those objectives help in some way to define which are those trends. Now, if we put them as a chemise de force, as a camisa de force, as we say, and we induce everybody to say how it will fit in this objective, this is a very bad use of those 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Maria, do you want to comment this?
You're on mute.
Well, nothing that revolutionary, though. I just have us. I would like us to remember that people respond to incentives, and for example, in the UK, we find that just kind of going on and on about engagement and this kind of thing doesn't work because it's not, for example, a factor in promotions. In fact, the more you engage, the less likely it is to get promoted because less time you have to publish in research policy, right? So it's kind of, we have to think about the incentives and convince university leaders that actually they should trust their academics more when it comes to that and not disincentivize them, right? The disincentivizing is a big problem. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. So now we go for a question that I believe is very important for the future of the university, which is communication, professional communication, the so-called public communication of science and technology, how this should be, emphasized, implemented, prioritized into the university's routines, and not only talking about the university as a whole, no, the rectory, but or in the administrative bodies, but also in the faculties, in the schools, in the academic units. This is the question from Sibelia Aguiar. Please, who wants to comment this?
Faculty and researchers are not prepared to be high communicators. They are trained and they develop their career communicating among their peers. And each discipline will have a vocabulary, will have a culture, will have a time horizon, philosopher, anthropologist, psychologist, communication professional. Each one will have its own culture, its own codes, and they are trained, and we are trained to communicate with our peers. Now, universities are financed by society. So the whole concept that is coming open science is how to vulgarize, how can we disseminate what we are doing. And there are few in our community that what we could call boundary spanners. This means that are faculty or researchers that know how to interact with society and how they translate what we are doing in the wording of the receiver. I mean, this translation of what we are doing using the vocabulary of the receiver, it's not trivial. It's something that asks for sensitivity. And the one that will develop this sensitivity are the one that very early in their career begin this interaction with the outside world, inside their department, inside their faculty, or outside the university. So to conclude, I think that there are two initiatives. One, at the level of the university, where we should have professional, ideally some coming from the science area, humanities, hard sciences, applied sciences, working in the area of communication, because we need people that understand what the university does. And those people, with some journalists, should explain to society what the university does. And this is what we could call a central initiative. But what is important, using the word that Maria used, induce, how can you induce and recognize the few that will accept to be invited for instance, BBC has an excellent program on science. I remember hearing that program on what was happening in Manaus in COVID. And these are professionals making those interviews. Now, how many of our colleagues will be able to, or will be willing? So when one of these colleagues is willing to do it and to provide this information to society through the media, I think we should recognize this and we should incentivize it. Thank you, sir.
Sergio, may I, because I remembered something that probably will lighten up and wake us up a bit. Several years back, Professor Nancy Rothwell, who is currently the Vice Chancellor of the University of Manchester, and I were having lunch about something. I think I was in leadership at the time or something. So, and I remember she looked at me and very, very sadly said, "My colleagues, Maria, can't write proposals." Now, she's a life scientist and she works on medicine that for recovery from strokes. And that's always been her dream, to find this kind of panacea of strokes. She said, "My colleagues in life sciences, we can't write proposals. I was reviewing something and it starts, cancer kills, and then goes on into jargon that even I can't understand." And that is kind of our problem, right? And I will agree with Jacques here that particularly older people in academia, scientists and scholars, we were not trained to sell. And communicating with the public is largely about selling what we're doing. And we should always remember that people sell benefits, right? And scientists never remember that. We're so caught up in the technicalities of what we're doing that we tell people what a wonderful time we have playing around with something, right? And it may be the collider, the CERN collider, or it may be my computer, right? But we do that, but we very rarely tell people about benefits. Now, having said that, I know that in Manchester, about 10 years ago, we started a program for PhD students where I don't remember, it was called something funny by the trainers, but we have professional trainers, right? And they train them how to pitch stuff. And it helps them write proposals, and it helps them interact with the media. And basically, they have these programs where they taught how to sell an idea in 3 minutes, the elevator pitch for science kind of thing. And it was very interesting because at first, particularly the students from the physics and engineering places were very reluctant to do it. And then they had such fun that they all underwent that. And I think this stays with them. Then they don't sniff when they have to make a YouTube video about the effects of COVID or something, right? They see it as part of their duty to society and community.
Sergio, allow me just to complete. I mean, there is a site called My Thesis in 180 Seconds. This is a world championship, and the final will be in Canada. I think it's going to be in September. And there are two, the Francophone and the Anglophone, that will come. I mean, they two different competitions. I recommend very strongly to see what just Maria said, how those young people in 180 seconds, they sell what they are doing in terms of the usefulness, not only the methodology, but the usefulness of what they are doing and why it's important, what they are doing. Just, it's a source of really of inspiration, those young people presenting their thesis in 180 seconds. Thank you.
Yeah. Also, please, you can think of looking Professor Andre Geim. This is the guy who won Nobel Prize for graphene. And it's kind of very interesting because 5 years before he won the Nobel Prize with Kostya Novoselov, his research assistant, people from the school were telling me, because they're in Manchester, were telling me that they know he will win it. They just don't know what for. And the reason they knew is they said he's an incredible communicator, but not only. His ideas, when he gets to the point of telling you what he's doing, are so clear that you're sitting at the seminar thinking, how didn't I think about that, right? So this is the guy who levitated a frog. So they won the Eng Nobel Prize, the joke he won for physics, by levitating a frog. Great joke, but actually it was great window for selling everything. He discovered something that is known as the Gecko glue. So basically it's such a strong glue that you can glue anything and it never gets unglued. So what did he do? He dressed one of his PhD students in a Spider-Man costume and stuck him to the ceiling and took a picture, right? When Andre Geim was told that he shouldn't single author papers because the university loses money, he co-authored the paper with his hamster, right? He put his name, the name of the hamster, and asterisk, this is my hamster, but I actually was told that I can't single author. That is about impact as well. That is, look, this policy is silly, but I'll buy it, right? So it's kind of, but there are people who are naturally like that, is what I'm saying. They know how to sell, and there are people who have to be taught and learn.
Yeah, very, very interesting. Thank you. Thank you. Very interesting examples and issues. No, that would be a good exercise for all of us in the university, trying to explain our thesis and what we do in a few seconds or a few minutes, and in a way people can understand. I think this is critical in order to, indeed, to measure the impacts, to, of course, to communicate, but also to measure, you know, how to say what we were measuring. And
PhD students, I usually ask them to do what I call the grandmother test. So basically, if you cannot explain to your grandmother what you're doing so she understands, you're not there. So basically, I ask them to rewrite the synopsis of their thesis until they've passed the grandmother test.
Yeah, well, here we call our aunt test. You have to explain it to that, you know, your aunt. So I believe this is one of the main challenges we have. You know, we do not know how to communicate, and it's not a problem of having the monitoring or the measuring the impacts. It's a way, you know, how to communicate it. We don't. I think we still have much more to advance in this area of communication than even in measuring the impacts. But so we are. Thank you,
Sergio,
thank you all.
Just one
Yes.
thing. I think that we should highlight also the few good examples that we have. Fiocruz, FAPESP, Academia Brasileira de Ciência. In those 3 institutions, and we have this in our site of the Project Metrics, they have very short films, like the one on Sérgio Ferreira, who is one of the Brazilian scientists. 4 minutes on the story of Sérgio Ferreira. And then Fiocruz and FAPESP have 1 minute of science. So we have already some examples of communication at Fiocruz, FAPESP, and Academia Brasileira de Ciência, and maybe we should highlight those examples so other people can use these examples to move on. Thank you.
Yeah, that's true. Thank you, Jacques, for this. So we are now approaching our time limit. So I would like, before ending this very, very interesting webinar, I would like to open the word to you. I don't know if you want to, in 30 seconds, making your last comments here before we close this session.
Justin, 15 seconds. I will do 15 seconds and then 30 seconds to Maria. Justin?
Okay.
Oh, good Lord. Okay, well, this feels like the thesis in 180 seconds, but no, this has been really worthwhile. I think sort of looking at, there are an awful lot of commonalities between the UK and Brazil, but also a lot of kind of differences from our institutional context that need thinking about. Was that 15 seconds? Okay, go.
Thank you. Well, Sergio, thank you. I think we have to build communities, and what you did today is helping us to move in this direction. The fact that Maria now is the first time that I had the privilege to hear what Maria is doing. I saw the PowerPoint that she sent a few days ago, and now her presentation. So let's be part of this community. We will continue, Sergio, working on those themes, and at some point of time, maybe you want to bring us together again. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jacques. Maria.
Let's hope that one of the impacts of this webinar was having great fun, apart from learning something. I felt very lucky to be part of it. Okay, so thank you.
Thank you. Well, we still have some questions from the audience, but we will send them to you so we can afterwards respond, so we can now end our webinar. I would like to thank you very, very much. Very interesting discussion, rich of ideas and challenges that we have to go for. And I hope we will have other opportunities to keep working together. Thank you very much, you all. Thank you for the audience, and have a nice weekend. And take care.